Good morning, everybody. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning. So we are doing a new thing today. So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bochar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So I just want to see, know your audience is the first principle. How many of you have had a chance to read this chapter I sent you from the Rosa Brooks book? Okay, so let me just start by what do you think? What did you think about what she wrote? I mean, obviously this is such an explosive issue, and it is the news of the day. The George Floyd murder trial for Derek Chauvin is supposedly starting this week. What did you think of her treatment of this issue when she talks about what it was like to be on the streets in Washington, D.C., in District 7? Paul Kalis.
Yeah, well, she humanized the police. She made it obvious that many of them were very good people, that very few were nasty characters, and that their job is extraordinarily difficult. And I was impressed with the fact that there were more social workers than anything else.
Right. Now, and if you read the whole book, what she talks about is that, crime is real. Urban crime is real. And that the people who, we might say with our caste lens on, are the inheritors of a caste system, or the victims of systemic racism, et cetera. So they're victims. But what she also acknowledges that, and in her book uses those kinds of concepts, where she says the crime that they perpetrate often on each other is real and is harmful. And that's what the police are dealing with. So you're right. So I think she does humanize the police who face real issues. So there's the humanization. What else did you take away from this story? It would, because she for those, if you haven't read it, she describes going with her partner to what was reported as a possible burglary or break-in, and they go in, the doors open, and they go in, and the apartment is dark, and then it turns out there's just like a 15-year-old kid who's the son of the homeowner, who's taking a shower, who's black, and it's in dark space, a young black man in dark space. And she describes the fact that she was with a partner who's not particularly jumpy and is not inclined to shoot. And so therefore he was able to find out that his life was not in danger, and it was a kid, and it became a non-event. But she said she's ridden with other police officers who are much more inclined to shoot, who would have said, I can't see this, maybe our life is in danger, and would have shot first and asked questions later. And so what was a non-event, she talks about could have been the ultimate event, and what a close call that was. So other thoughts about it, Harriet?
Well, she writes that cops do have a difficult job. At the same time, she says it's just that being a cop isn't nearly as dangerous as cops think it is.
Yes, that was so interesting. At the beginning of the chapter, she does describe the fact that, so there is a dissonance or a tension. They are trained to think that anybody could kill them on any day. Watch the hands. And when they go to police academy, they see films of cops getting shot. But at the beginning of this chapter, she talks about how statistically, it's actually pretty safe. And the DC police officer, what does she say? There's been only one officer who was actually shot and killed in the line of duty in the last 20 years, right? And he was off duty when that happened. So that in fact, the reality is looked at in one way, it's not so dangerous. They don't actually get shot. The statistics don't bear out the danger, but their psychology is that it's extremely dangerous, and they're trained to believe that it's extremely dangerous. And also she makes a whole premise about the fact that the police officer believe they have a right to go home safely, and their right to go home safely, a right to go home safe, often inclines them towards shooting first and asking questions later. So, yes, but she does make that point, Harriet. Not as dangerous in reality as they are trained to think it is.
And of course, if they didn't carry guns, and of course, if there weren't as many guns throughout the country, that would be make a huge difference as well, I believe.
Yes. Marilyn. Marilyn, you're muted.
Okay, she mentions that police force had an overhaul of use force policies, training and investigations reform. And after that reform, there was a substantial decrease in any of the major shootings or events. So it just points to how training was important for them, and training is so important for the psychological welfare of the police officers to turn their thoughts in a totally different way. I don't know how, that's capable, but over time, maybe.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's
Right, and it talks in the end about maybe police could get trained to recognize that their right to go home safely also has to be measured against the right of the citizens that they encounter to go home safely. And right now, the only right to go home safe is the police officer. But her critique is that the citizens also have a right to go home safely, and that should be part of their training. Linda Leffert.
Well, I think it's the person who expressed the feeling, in detail about how he felt about that. I don't think that's how the majority of people in the police force, they don't, and I don't know if that can change the idea that it's like a soldier going to war and because in a way, then I think that cuts the other way. I thought in one way, you're trying to say this isn't a war, us against them. And yet he's saying they should think like you do in war, this is your job, and you might get killed, but that's part of the job. It's not very likely.
Right.
So, but I totally agree with Harriet. I think that the real biggest issue is how many guns there are. I don't remember, I'm not good at statistics, but the number of guns in the United States compared to any other civilized country is like, and I think that's the real, because I could actually think about somebody saying, well, yeah, the reason that the death rate of the police is so low is because they shoot first and ask questions later. If they waited to make sure that this was a teenager who was naked, who forgot the code of his apartment, they would have more deaths.
Right.
So I think, training helps, but I have to say that I think and I'm not optimistic that that's happening anytime soon. And until we get rid of all the guns and make them so easy to get and so prevalent, I don't see a huge change in the philosophy. I think this person is in the minority of thinking, and I think changing significant number of people to his way of thinking is not realistic. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah. So what I want to do is I just want to read a couple of paragraphs here from her piece, and then I want to pivot. I want to pivot to our Seder table in a few weeks. Okay, but I'm looking on page 315, bottom half of the second column. It was a short encounter, and from the perspective of the official record, it was a non-event. Since there was no burglary, no report was required, we cleared the call, went off to the next assignment. But I've often thought about that night and how easy it would have been for things to end differently. What if a different officer had been my partner? What if it had been Reed, the officer who nearly drew his weapon on a girl reaching into her purse in her own living room? It wasn't hard to imagine someone jumpier than Jake, shooting first and asking questions later. In fact, it wasn't even hard to imagine an officer like Reed telling us that our slowness to point our weapons had placed us in serious danger, and our survival was pure dumb luck. I could hear his voice in my head. You just walked right in. You should have called for backup the second you saw that door open. Then you should have made a tactical entry, etc. Then how would your kids feel if you didn't come home because you took a stupid risk? And then, of course, she writes this whole bureaucratic report that she imagines about how if that Reed guy had shot this kid, it would have been whitewashed as a tragedy, but nothing actionable legally. So here's what I and just because this is the week of the George Floyd murder trial, one last paragraph and then we'll pivot. Look on page 318. 318. That is why police in America end up killing so many people. It's not that they're sadists or that they don't care about the lives of Black Americans. This may be true of a few, but not most. So, Derek Chauvin, that's obviously true. He's a sadist and a racist, and he murdered George Floyd, and there's video of it. It's true of him, but she says it's not true of most. It's just that everything in police training and culture tells them to expect danger from every quarter. Officers are trained to be hyper-vigilant and respond to potential threats instantly. They're told they have a right to go home safe. Too often, they forget that other people have a right to go home too. So here is the point of connection with the Seder. So I want to do a series of quick questions that are going to be binary about your Seder table. And I think that we'll all come back to this issue and this that we're talking about, okay? We'll start with easy question. Think about your Seder table, in 2.5 weeks. Think about the matzah. Quick question. Is matzah a happy symbol or a sad symbol? Does matzah make you happy or does matzah make you sad? How many think matzah makes you happy? Okay, and how many of you think that matzah makes you sad? Right, and the answer is you're both right, because matzah is at the same time, and it's going to turn out that every symbol on that Seder table cuts both ways, and it cuts both ways at the same time. So matzah makes you happy because it's the bread of liberation. I mean, this is the moment of Exodus. They're going out. They don't even have time to pack their things. They don't have 18 minutes for the bread to rise. They just go. It's the bread of freedom. And matzah makes you sad because it's lechamoni. It's the bread of affliction that they ate after a hard day of slavery, right? So you see that it's both. And I want to just ask you to, and we'll see that the same kind of multivalence, happy and sad, applies to every symbol. But just take a look on page, the next to last page of the handout, matzah's double identity. And I want to ask you, what do you think about that? And what do you think this teaches us about life? As everyone knows, the Jews eat unleavened bread because the dough they brought out from Egypt in their rush to leave never had a chance to rise. Matzah is the bread of liberation. It's the mark of an exodus whose rapid pace overtook them unprepared. Yet, halachma, the first official explanation for matzah in the Haggadah, calls it the bread of poverty and persecution. Based on Leviticus, you shall eat unleavened bread of distress. Okay? So here, matzah is a memorial not of liberation, but of slavery. So here's my question. The Seder is capable of telling you that the same basic symbol not only means two different things, but has two entirely different emotional valences. It's happy and it's sad at the same time. Just react to that if you would. What do you think of that kind of thinking? Annette Miller. And if you'll unmute, please.
So I think that's just very typical It defines who we are as a people, what we've been brought up to know all along. I think it's what makes us us, that ability to carry two emotions at the same time, to be happy and to be empathetic for those who do not have as much, to realize in the moment of happiness, there's also a sadness. And I think that's very much what accounts for feelings of empathy. And I think that is really built into our tradition. So some people would say that might be, that's that guilt thing that comes up. And, it might be. But I think that it's really kind of important to understand as you are happy, you are also remembering the time of affliction. And one symbol can be both. I think it's nothing short of brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you. And by the way, you're going to see that same move, that the same symbol represents two conflicting things. Basically, for every big Seder symbol, it applies to that. David and Susan, Kopelman.
I'm just thinking of the your cup is half empty or half full. So in part, it's your perception of what life is, and that most things there's a somewhat of a silver lining, or at least a positive thought in every negative thought. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think about the moment that we're in. We're marking the 1 year, anniversary of the lockdown. That makes us sad. Most of us are not going to have the kind of Seders we had 2 years ago and our life before that. We're going to have some form of social distance, smaller Zoom. That makes us sad. But, those of us who've been vaccinated and you get the CDC guidelines, that makes us a glimmer of hope. You can maybe begin to see life coming back all at the same time. And I think the Seder tries to capture that, Susan. Yeah. David.
Well, if you think of the creation of the state of Israel, there's certainly euphoria about after 2,000-3,000 years, the Jews returned to their homeland. And yet at the same time, you remember that no country was willing to take in Jews to escape the Holocaust, including the United States, closed their borders. And had there been in Israel earlier, perhaps 6 million or a little less would not have been murdered in the camps. So there's a kind of a bittersweet connection with the creation of the state of Israel.
Right. And David, the calendar reflects that, because you have, in Pesach, the weeks after Pesach are kind of Jewish History Month, and you get Yom HaShoah, and then a week later you get Yom HaZikaron for the Israeli soldiers who died, and then you get Yom HaAtzmaut within 24 hours of that. And you go from total silence to the celebration of the Jewish state within days, within 1 day, and then you broaden it out to a week, you have the Holocaust Memorial. So it's the calendar also reflects these very contradictory feelings all at the same time. And it's literally on the Seder plate. Yeah, so it feels very true to life. I saw a few other hands that were up. Okay, let me just go through a few of these other symbols, and then I want to bring it back. If you were to go through life with the eyes of the Seder, if you were to go through life with the eyes of the Haggadah, that the matzah is happy and sad, what would that mean in terms of how you look at our country now and at the issues that we're facing? Okay, next, so let's talk about charoset. Charoset. Does it make you happy or sad? Somebody make the case that charoset makes you sad. I mean, that's the case that's easier to make. Why does charoset make you sad? Anybody? Linda.
Well, if it's sad, it's for the same reason that the other one was sad. What it's supposed to remind us of, and remind us of something that was sad.
Right, but what is it that charoset reminds you of that was sad?
The mud and the bricks, and that they were forced to make as slaves. But I have to say, at our particular Seder, for some reason, I don't know, maybe it's just us, but Everyone really looks forward to eating that roses.
Yeah, we'll get to that, right? But it's supposed to be about bricks and bondage and mortar and slavery. So charoset is bricks and bondage, makes you sad, but everyone likes eating charoset. Now, for 10 points, in Ashkenazi circles, what is one critical ingredient of charoset? What do we Ashkenazis use to make charoset?
Apples.
Apples. Now, why do Ashkenazi Jews use apples? There's a reason for this. It's not just that apples taste good. There's a reason for this. So this is the other resonance of charoset. The Midrash says, and I'll show it to you in a minute, but the Midrash says that the Israelite men were despairing of their future. What's the point of bringing in another generation to be slaves? We don't want to have any more kids who are slaves. And the Israelite women seduced their husbands under the shade of an apple tree. They'd feed them an apple, they'd take a nap under the apple tree, and then the women seduced their husbands so the Jewish people could continue. So charoset is made out of applesauce, apples, to remind us of the resilience of the Israelite women. So you'll see this, by the way, on the last page of the handout. Why this charoset? One, Egyptian bricks. That's the one that we all know. These sun-dried bricks produced, constituted the chief building materials of Egypt. Okay, but a taste of Song of Songs. Through its texture, maybe like mortar, the taste of charoset is sweet like a fruit ambrosia. According to rabbinic midrash, the Jewish women were heroines. The women took the initiative to arouse their husbands to procreate, and thus they use apples. So is it resilience or is it bondage? And it is both, right? I'll just give you two more examples, and then I want to come back to Rosa Brooks' book, and I want to come back to how what you think about this way of thinking and what its implications are for our country. The egg, the hard-boiled egg, is it happy or sad? Give me a case that the hard-boiled egg is happy. Anyway, Harriet.
Well, it's rebirth.
It's rebirth. Okay. Give me a case that the hard-boiled egg is deeply sad. Deeply sad. David? You're muted.
No chicken shall ever emerge from a hard-boiled egg.
Okay. No chicken. Okay. And what's the food that Jews classically eat when they come back from the cemetery?
Eggs.
A hard-boiled egg, right? And by the way, that's from the lentil stew story in where Jacob, where Esau sells his birthright for a pot of lentil stew. And Rashi says that was actually the Shiva for Abraham. Abraham had died, and that they were eating lentil stew because lentils are round and death is universal. It goes around to every house. And also lentils are round because there's nothing to say. Very often with death and loss, words are much less important than presence. So there's no mouth to a lentil. And as a result, there's this universal Jewish tradition to have round food, whether it's eggs or bagels or lentils, when you first come back from the cemetery. So it is both springtime and the opposite of springtime. It's a cemetery. So it's the same thing. So one last thing, Susan Kopelman had mentioned the half cup. So you think that if there's one symbol that should be just all happy, it's the 4 cups of wine, right? Because that's supposed to be for the 4 verbs of redemption that God offers the Israelites. But there's a midrash that the wine should be red, because what we're supposed to think about when we're drinking our wine, which is a symbol of joy, right? And associated with verbs of redemption. the Midrash says we're supposed to think about the blood of the Hebrew newborns who were drowned in the Nile. And that's why the wine should be red, to remind us of genocide. So in every one of these cases, it's happy and it's sad, it's life and it's death, it's redemption and it's genocide, it's slavery and it's freedom at the same time. So here's my question. Is that kind of thinking helpful? And to what extent do you bring that kind of thinking, Seder deep thinking, that the A and the opposite of A can both be true? To what extent do you bring that outside of the Seder table to the rest of your life? And what would it mean if you were to bring that kind of Seder table thinking to our nation's hardest issues? Any takers? Yes, Susan Copeland.
The kind of thinking that we bring to politics anymore. Your way is wrong and my way is right. There is no thinking that there's truth in what you say and there's truth in what I say. So our nation would be doing very well if they started thinking deep Seder thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you so much, right? There's truth in what you say. Even if I don't agree, there's truth in what you say. And it's very hard in our American political system to get there. But that's deep Seder thinking. There's truth to the other side too. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the stimulus plan was voted on strictly by party lines. And what is that about our country that you can't get reasonable people to, to come together from different sides of the aisle? But that's not Seder thinking. That's Jersey thinking. I'm this Jersey, you're that Jersey. But Seder thinking is, wait a minute, there's complexity here. Other thoughts about the resonance of this? So I'll just bring it to a close with Rosa Brooks. When you see, if you've been watching the news, they've been now showing you the Derek Chauvin murder of George Floyd, and that just, that is just so shocking and horrible, and that's on the news now every day. But Rosa Brooks is making the case that that's not most police. And most police are decent and caring and, and they're dealing with a violent world. And so I think her book, Tangled Up in Blue, that's why it's tangled up, because if you really get complexity, you get tangled up. There's just a lot of layers to every issue. And there's not a lot of layers to Derek Chauvin. That's murder pure and simple. But many cases, it's complicated, and it's about training, and it's about less guns, and it's about different orientation. But her premise is that most officers are decent people, and that feels like an important corrective to also hold in mind when we think about the complexities of our time. Any last takers on Rosa Brooks and on the Seder and on deep Seder thinking? And then I'm going to pivot for a final minute to our cast class tonight. Yes, Dottie. Dottie, if you can unmute, please. Still not unmuted.
Okay.
Yes.
No, when I received this book, I got it through Amazon. There makes you laugh at the start, and as you read, the thing that hit me most of all was that we should say, thank goodness there are people like this Rosa Brooks who see the other side, who they're committed, and she's doing volunteer police work with a kid's mortgage, a dog, or whatever it is. that she gives of herself and the explanations, as I say, I've only read 50 pages, I think is phenomenal. And this is what helps make life a little easier, that you have people that can commit to showing the real story. That's, I mean, I love this book. I think she's wonderful.
Dottie, thank you. Thank you. I love it too. Thank you. I love being tangled up in blue. I love being tangled up in complexity. And I think that's the key. That's the confluence with the Seder. The Seder is tangled up in complexity. She's tangled up in complexity. And I agree, we're not, each in our own spheres, we're not tangled up enough in complexity in our country. So thank you, Dottie. Any other thoughts and comments? Bert Klein. And Bert, if you can please unmute. Bert, you're still muted.
How's that?
Now you're good.
Okay, I'm with Sandy's machine. I'm just a quick reflection of police people, because when I was growing up, when I was in college, and a policeman family moved in next to us, and it was very interesting talking to him as a neighbor as opposed to as a policeman. And it was, I've always remembered it, every so often I think of it, that he was just like the rest of us, trying to do his job. And some are good, some are better than others in terms of crowd control or trying to find out what happened. And they're good and decent policemen who will not just suddenly start shooting. And there are those who have more of a triggered attitude, like any other job. But unfortunately, if they get too excited, it could be disastrous for the person on the other end of the gun, unfortunately. So I'd like to just think about the human side of the policeman.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I find it interesting to read epilogues. And the epilogue to this book is particularly interesting because she didn't just end her participation with writing the book. She still has remained a part-time officer, but she has started a program, I think it's Georgetown Law School, in which people are accumulating and trying to determine how to best help people without arresting them. That because arresting them creates a blot on their character for their lifetime.
Right.
And more and more people are coming to this program now, including people in the Metropolitan Police group.
Yes. Yeah, I loved her agency and her activism and her doing stuff. I found that I agree with you, Paul. I thought that was a very inspiring thing, to do what she could to change minds, which actually brings us now to cast tonight at 6:30. We're continuing our dialogue with the Western Avenue Baptist Church and also the JCRC. And the topic tonight is the story that Andrea had suggested a few weeks ago from Cast about the guy with the Make America Great Again hat, the plumber, and how she changes his heart. And the heart of our class tonight is about how do you change a human heart? The heart of our class is how do you change a human heart? We're going to talk about, and it's going to be mostly in breakout rooms. It's going to be mostly in breakout rooms. It's going to be basically focused on 3 questions. What did Isabel Wilkerson do that changed this guy's heart? What's a case where your own heart was changed? And have you ever succeeded in changing the heart of somebody else? And so those 3 things. What worked for Isabel Wilkerson in the story? when was our own heart changed? And have you ever been able to change somebody else's heart? And that's going to be mostly in breakout room. Next month, the April class is going to be Nami Nadich, who's going to talk about practical things that we can do if your heart has been changed. And if you want to do something, what are things that we can do? And that's going to be Nami's class next month in April. So I wanted to just, with our remaining time today, I wanted to ask you, for those of you who are thinking about this, who are going to join the CAST dialogue, if anybody has any thoughts to share on changing the human heart, on has your heart changed? Have you changed somebody else's heart? And what does that look like? Feels like a heart is a tough thing to change. But if anyone here has a story of a changed heart, I would love to invite that. Andrea Waltzing. And if you can unmute, please.
Well, I appreciate all the attributes you've given me for suggesting this chapter. I think I have a story. I was touched by this chapter because of a personal experience, which had to do with the loss of a mother. When I was a young mother with 3 little children, my mother suddenly died of a cerebral aneurysm, and it was a shock. It was a shock. She hadn't been sick. It was just a shock, and I was the only one of all my friends who had lost a parent, and nobody quite knew. Well, as you said, words don't matter, but nobody quite knew what to do with me in some ways. And I didn't really know what to do with myself. People would say, "How are you?" And I would say, "I'm doing okay." But inside I was very raw and depressed and bleeding and whatever. And sort of probably at the end of Shloshim or into a month, there was a gathering of friends that I knew and some that I didn't know. And it was the first time I had been with people. Again, people were asking me. And I was standing in the corner of a room, and all of a sudden this man that I had only met once came up to me and said he was sorry about my mother. And then he said, "What happened?" And I found myself just pouring out the tales of being called in the middle of the night and having to rush to the hospital and on and on. And this man was just listening quietly and attentively. It was such a profound experience to have that experience. So maybe no surprise to all of you, but that man was Arthur Waldstein. So I have to say he changed my life with those words.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. Thank you. One of the things that's just so rare is to care, is to experience caring. Caring is rare, and listening is rare, and both of those will change a heart. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you. And may your mother's memory be for a blessing. Anyone else want to share just a personal story of a heart changing?
Rabbi?
Yes.
Miriam, I would like to share this story.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you.
Many, many years ago, I have a wonderful nephew and niece who had an intermarriage. And my nephew's wife was Asian, and she had a son that my nephew adopted because he loved them both very much. Excuse me. And then they were going to have their child, and her son was raised as a Catholic, and now they were going to have their son. And my nephew had called me and said, Aunt Mimi, our child, it will be a boy, is going to be raised also as a Catholic. And I said to him, I know how much you love your wife. And I know what a wonderful husband you have been. And she is a wonderful niece that came into our family. And I just started to talk to him about our Judaism and how proud we are. And I said, did you ever ask Luann? Did you ever ask her if now this beautiful child that's going to come into the world could be raised Jewish and have a circumcision? So he said, no, I never did. And I said, well, whatever you do, darling, whatever you do, I will be at the baptism, if that is, and this child will be brought up with lots of love, like the son that you share. He called me up the next day. I remember I was at my sister's home. My brother-in-law was dying. And he called me up the next day and he said, Aunt Mimi, he said, I asked Luann and she said yes immediately. And so we are going to have, our child will be brought up Jewish. She had absolutely nothing to say to me except, yes, we will. And so I happened to tell Rabbi Shield the story. And he said, Mimi, he said, you did something that I've never been able to do. And I laughed. And he said, I said, oh, Rabbi, you're always like you, Wes, always telling us something positive about ourselves. And he said, no, I mean it. I've never been able to do that. And you brought this whole family together. And everyone is very happy. And Judaism is going to be part of their life too.
So Mimi, I love this story and I echo Rabbi Chill's words. Here's my question to you all these years later.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've lived through a very complicated age. We're in the middle of a very complicated age.
Right.
Looking back at that story, what is the lesson learned? What do you learn from that story about how to change a human heart?
That I had listened and I did not make judgments, and my nephew listened and that is what we have to do. As you said, Rabbi, we have to listen to each other. We're going to differ. But if we just keep screaming at one another, nothing gets said. Nothing is left but hurt feelings and anger. And unfortunately, as we're all experiencing in our country, our government people, many of them do, but most of them don't listen today and just are on one side or the other.
So, you know, it's so interesting in both your story and Andrea's story, the key was a deep listening.
Mm-hmm.
The key was a deep listening. And it feels like if you want to change a human heart, it begins with a deep listening, a non-judgmental, judgment-free listening. So thank you, Mimi. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you all for being on the call. Tonight, I hope you will join us at 6:30. And I hope that the heart of the class, as I say, is a conversation in the breakout rooms about how to change a human heart. And I hope you'll come prepared to share. Come prepared to share. And then next month, we'll be primed for a conversation about action. What do we do now? If our hearts have been changed, what do we do now? Thank you guys so much. And hopefully I'll see you tonight at 6:30. Thank you.